Good afternoon, everyone. We are the third group and we will be tackling about the section 10.1, which is all about the policies of the DRRM or the RA 10121. This section has three objectives, and the first one is to know the creation of NDRRMC. The second is to explain the works of LGUs during disasters in regards by the DRRM law. The third is to explain how LGUs and CSOs address the disaster risk reduction and management needs. So I will be focusing on beginning of the Philippine DRRM law. So in 2004, a tsunami claimed more than 2,000 people in the coastal regions of Indian Ocean. This initiated the formulation of the Yugo Framework of Action as the international community's response. But what exactly is the Yugo Framework of Action? The Yugo Framework of Action serves as the key instrument for implementing disaster risk reduction adopted by the member states of the United Nations. Its overarching goal is to build resilience of nations and communities to disasters by achieving substantive reduction of disaster losses by 2015 in lives and in the social, economic, and environmental assets of communities and countries. The Yugo framework has 5 priorities for action. The first one is to ensure that disaster risk reduction is a national and a local priority with a strong institutional basis for implementation. The second is to identify, assess, and monitor disaster risk and enhance early warning. The third is to use knowledge, innovation, and education to build a culture of safety and resilience at all levels. The fourth is to reduce the underlying risk factors, and the last one is to strengthen disaster preparedness for effective response at all levels. Now, how did the DRRM progress into the Philippine DRRM law or the RA 10121? Let us look back to the history of the DRRM in the Philippines using this timeline. The Philippine government, from its pre-Commonwealth days up to the present, has evolved a scheme to counteract the effects of disasters, both natural and human-induced. Our disaster management system traces back its origin to 1941 when President Manuel L. Quezon created Executive Order No. 335, establishing the National Emergency Commission and implementing measures to control and coordinate civilian participation to meet serious crises. Consequently, the Provincial Emergency Committee was created in charge of the supervision and control over the municipal and city emergency committees. In 1954, the National Civil Defense Administration or NCDA was established through Republic Act No. 1190, which also created national and local civil defense councils. Thereafter, in 1968, the NCDA was designated as the national coordinator to oversee and implement EO No. 159 that required the establishment of a disaster control organization by all government offices, including departments, bureaus, agencies, offices, instrumentalities, and political subdivisions of the government. The NCDA is tasked to report on the degree of preparedness of all government offices to the Office of the President. In 1970, President Ferdinand Marcos saw the need to establish a disaster and calamities plan prepared by an interdepartmental planning group on disasters and calamities. Then, in 1972, the Office of Civil Defense or the OCD was established. It was mandated to coordinate national-level activities and functions of the national government, private institutions, and civic organizations. Finally, in 1978, through Presidential Decree No. 1566, the National Disaster Coordinating Council, or the NDCC, was established as the highest policy-making body and the focal organization for disaster management in the country. The law also provided for the establishment of regional, provincial, city, municipal, and barangay disaster coordinating councils. In 2009, the Congress enacted the Climate Change Act of 2009, and in 2010, it has enacted the Philippine Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Act. These twin laws and the RRM have common goals and objectives. The first one is to increase the resilience of vulnerable communities and the country against natural disasters, and the second is to reduce damage and loss of lives and properties due to disasters. In particular, RA 10121 provides for the development of policies and plans and the implementations of actions and measures pertaining to all aspects of the RRM. The law acknowledges that there is a need to adopt a disaster risk reduction and management approach that is holistic, comprehensive, integrated, and proactive in lessening the socio-economic and environmental impacts of disasters, including climate change, and promote the involvement and participation of all sectors and all stakeholders concerned. at all levels, especially the local community. As the effects of the back-to-back typhoons in our country last 2009 have caused a grave enormity of impacts, which also tell us how helpless many areas had been despite the systems in place during those times, it has also resulted in the Philippines' ratification of the ASEAN Agreement, which is also the ASEAN's commitment to the Yugu Framework of Action. It has paved the way for the revamp of the NDCC. Now, this is the timeline of the progress of implementation of the DRRM law. The 14th Philippine Congress passed Republic Act 10121 or the Philippine Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Act of 2010 along with the Republic Act 9729 or the Climate Change Act of 2009. The DRRM Act mandates the Office of the Civil Defense to formulate a National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Plan or NDRRMP, subject to the approval of the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council. And in December 2011, the OCD came out with the NDRRMP. So on May 27, 2010, the Philippine DRRM law was signed. Implementing rules and regulation was signed on the 27th of December 2010 and it took effect 15 days after. The National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Frameworks was assigned on June 16, 2011. Lastly, the National DRRM Plan was approved by the National Council on February 7, 2012.
Creation of the RRMC. What is NDRRMC? It is formally known as the National Disaster Coordinating Council, which is NDCC, and is a working group of various government, non-government, civil sector, and private sector organizations of the government of the Republic of the Philippines established by Republic Act 10121 of 2010. The creation was well received as it taps local government units, communities, and civil society. It focuses in being responsible to local communities' disaster management, and in protecting the people. The issue that arose before, the first was the challenge of making it community-based. The NDCC being primarily second is the NDCC being primarily for disaster response. The act was not proactive enough as it only focused on response, the aftermath situations. So how it was solved? The framers of the new law, RA 10121, prioritized and give emphasis to pre-disaster activities, giving more emphasis on disaster risk reduction and identifying vulnerability rather than just the response. How did it became community-based? As framers sought for balance of both pre- and post-disaster measures, it expanded as the task became enormous, leading to different individuals and organizations to cooperate, making it community-based.
So the salient features of NDRMC is community-based, proactive, and serves as a protection. Additional information. The DRRM Act paved way for a paradigm shift from emergency relief and response to a proactive approach that focuses on disaster prevention and risk reduction. The Philippines was the first in Asia to have enacted its own law on disaster risk reduction and management through Republic Act 10121. So here we have the paradigm shift that happened between the NDCC or the National Disaster Coordinating Council and to now, which is the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council. So the then is the NDCC and the now is the NDRRMC. So before, top-down centralized disaster management became bottom-up participatory disaster risk reduction and management. So, before, disaster as function of physical hazards, but now disasters as reflection of people's vulnerability. And the last one, which is it focuses on disaster response, but now integrated approach to reduce disaster risk.
Now, let's talk about the DRRMC organizational structure and function. These are the things to know about the Council. It advises the President regarding all phases of all disasters, from preparedness to rehabilitation. It is also the country's highest policy-making body for disaster risk reduction and management. The top of NDRRMC, or the chairman, is the Secretary of National Defense, or DND. Implementing arm of NDRRMC is handled by the Office of Civil Defense, OCD. NDRRMC includes various government agencies under its wing for disaster risk reduction and management purposes. So there are 4 secretaries under the chairman from 4 frontline agencies. So the first one is Department of Science and Technology. The next is Department of Interior and Local Government. The Department of Social Welfare and Development, and the National Economic and Development Authority. What is the role of the Department of National Defense in NDRRMC? It is also known as a DND and serves as the agency that is mandated to guard against external and internal threats to national peace and security in times of peace and war and disasters.
Then, what is the role of Office of Civil Defense and NDRRMC? The first one, its primary mission is administering a comprehensive National Civil Defense and DRRM program. Second, it is the lead agency in the continuous development of strategic and systematic approach, as well as measures to reduce the vulnerabilities and risks to hazard. And the last one, its main responsibility is to ensure the implementation and monitoring of National Disaster Risk Reduction
and Management Plan, or NDRRMP,
as the overall responsibility of approving the NDRRMP and ensuring that it is consistent with NDRRMF. It is also as the main responsibility of coordination, integration, supervision, and monitoring the development and enforcement of agencies and organizations of the various laws, plans, programs, guidelines, codes, or technical standards required by this Act. And it is also the managing and mobilizing resources for DRRM, including the National DRRM Fund. And take note that the 4 vice chairmen head are clustered for prevention and mitigation, preparedness, response and rehabilitation, and recovery.
and this is the hierarchy of NDRRMC's organizational structure. The first one is the chairman, where the secretary and national defense settles. Second one is the 4 vice chairmen, and the last one is the other organizations that are related to DRRM.
Role of LGUs, or local government units. LGU refers to the political subdivision, the 3 levels of Philippines local government: provinces and independent cities, component cities, and municipalities and barangays. Its major role is to develop a community, provide the links between people and government, address its community's problems and concerns, enforce policies, and hold influence over its communities. So one of its roles is that to ensure that the local DRRM council shall have their own capable and responsible chief officer that is supported by personnel and have enough knowledge and is expert in field of DRRM. They are tasked to operate and ensure that there will be DRRM council for each region. These councils for each region are expected to come up with a local disaster risk reduction management plan covering all parts needed. They had the power to allocate only 5% of their annual internal revenue allotment for works or services in connection with calamities. This is also known as Calamity Fund. They serve as bridges between national government and the residents they represent. They also provide the support that sustain community-based DRRM. They also serve as frontliners when disaster strikes.
The Regional DRRM Council, or the RDRMC, serves as NDRMC's regional arm. It maintains an operating facility on a 24-hour basis, which is known as the Regional Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Operations Center. There are a total of 17 in our country, which is responsible for coordinating, integrating, supervising, monitoring, and evaluating local DRMCs. The hierarchy in RDRMC. First is Civil Defense Officer of OCD, followed by the Regional Director of DSWD, Regional Director of DILG, Regional Director of DOST, and Regional Director of NED. Followed by the members, 14 line departments, DOH, DENR, DA, DepEd, DOE, DOF, DOTC, DBM, DPWH, DFA, DOJ, DOLF, and DOT. 10 other government agencies, OPAPP, CHED, AFP, PNP, PRC, NAPC, VDC, NCRFW, HUDC, Climate Change Commission, and PhilHealth. 2 government financial institutions, GIS, GSIS, and SSS, 5 LGU leagues, ULAP, LPP, LCP, LMP, and LNB, 4 representatives from COSOs, and 1 representative from private sector. Hierarchy in LDRRMC. First is Chief Executive, followed by the members, the respective heads of LDRMO, Local Social Welfare and Development Office, Local Health Office, Local Agriculture Office, Gender and Development Office, Local Engineering Office, Local Veterinary Office, and Local Budget Office. Local Planning and Development Officer, Division Head, Superintendent, or District Supervisor of the DepEd, Highest Ranking Officer of AFP, Provincial City Director, Component City or Municipal Chief of PNP, Provincial Director or City or Municipal Fire Marshal of the BFP, and President of the Liga ng mga Barangay. Philippine Red Cross for accredited CSOs and 1 private representative. We must remember that the implementing rules and regulations of the new DRM law activate depends on the scope or size of a disaster, considering if national or local, such as Barangay Development Council or BDC if barangay is affected. City or Municipal Disaster Risk Reduction and Management or MDRMC or CDRRMC if 2 or more barangays are affected. Provincial Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council or PDRRMC if 2 or more cities or municipalities are affected. Regional Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council RDRMC if 2 or more provinces are affected. National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council NDRRMC if 2 or more regions are affected.
So our next topic is recognition of civil society organizations, or mainly known as CSOs. So what are CSOs and their roles? So CSOs are non-state actors whose aims are neither to generate profits nor to seek governing power. Also, the good thing about this is that it unites people to advance shared goals and interests. They are also known as highly organized groups that have been engaged in disaster situations and other public activities. The best example would be the community pantry. So it is divided into 4 groups. So the first one is the civic organization, which focuses on advocating equality on land rights. The second is the people's organization, which was established by small farmers, fisher folks, and slum dwellers, which focuses on independence and peace. So the third one are the NGOs, or known as non-government organizations, which focuses on human rights. And the last one is the other entities or individuals. It is about social institutions like churches, schools, medias, and professional associations. So for additional information is that CSO's involvement in different services that are needed by society, especially in time of disaster, has filled the gaps and freed the government from expenditures that are much needed in this development agenda. So it basically means that CSOs are the one who have helped, especially in dire situations, instead of the government. So these are the references we use, and we are a group 3 composed of 7 members. And that's all. Thank you for listening. I hope you learned something today.